Close your eyes and imagine the streets of a medieval England village. The year is somewhere around 1300. The air smells of damp wood smoke rising from thatched cottages, and the ground beneath your feet is soft with mud. Farmers push creaking carts filled with sacks of grain, their boots sinking in the muck as gray clouds press low overhead. But these sacks do not carry golden wheat, the grain we usually picture when we think of bread and prosperity. Instead, they hold barley, coarse and humble, the real lifeline of the people. To modern ears, this might sound unexpected. Wheat seems noble, elegant, and tied to the image of fine white loaves. But in reality, for most of England's population, barley was the grain that kept them alive. The question is, why was this rougher, darker grain chosen over wheat, and why did it dominate daily life in medieval England? The truth is stark. Medieval life was not defined by banquets or royal feasts, no matter how many stories tell us otherwise. Life for ordinary villagers was fragile, and hunger was always near. Wheat was precious, fragile, and demanding. It needed rich soil, steady sunshine, and careful care. Barley, by contrast, was tough, forgiving, and reliable. In a world where a single failed harvest could spell disaster, barley offered something wheat could not: a steady chance at survival. Think about the English landscape of that time. The countryside stretched with valleys and rolling hills, but the soil was often heavy, damp, and difficult to till. Rains came frequently, sometimes blessing the land, sometimes drowning it. Wheat struggled in those conditions. It preferred lighter earth, drier skies, and steady warmth, the kind of climate England could not guarantee. Barley, however, thrived where wheat faltered. Its roots could hold on in thin, rocky soil. It could tolerate chilly winds blowing in from the North Sea. Even in fields where wheat withered, barley stood upright, offering at least some harvest when nothing else would grow. For peasants who relied entirely on what they could reap, barley was not just a crop, it was a promise. Barley also fit into daily life in ways wheat never could. It became bread, yes, though not the soft, white bread we imagine from noble tables. Barley bread was darker, heavier, often mixed with oats or rye, and filled with the earthy taste of survival. It was rough on the tongue, sometimes gritty, but it filled stomachs and kept muscles working in the fields. More importantly, barley was the foundation of ale, the drink consumed by nearly everyone. In a time when streams and wells were often polluted, all was safer than water. Lightly fermented, low in alcohol but rich in calories, it was drunk by adults and children alike. Every household brewed it. Every monastery brewed it. Every village tavern poured it. Without barley, there would have been no daily drink, no reliable source of safe nourishment. It is no exaggeration to say barley was the liquid bread of medieval England. Wheat, meanwhile, was a symbol of status. The wealthy preferred wheat bread because it was lighter, softer, and easier to eat. Known as manchet, white wheat loaves were expensive to make and almost impossible for ordinary peasants to afford. To eat wheat bread was to announce your wealth and social rank. To eat barley bread was to reveal your poverty, but also your persistence. The bread on your table was more than food. It was identity. Wheat marked privilege, barley marked necessity. But since most of England's people were not noble, not rich, and not powerful, barley dominated their diet. It was not a matter of taste but of survival. Climate swings reinforced this reliance. The so-called medieval warm period brought some years of good harvests, but weather was always unpredictable. Sudden cold, long rains, or unexpected frosts could destroy fragile wheat crops overnight. Barley, though not perfect, gave peasants a fighting chance. It ripened faster, had a shorter growing season, and could be harvested sooner. That meant fewer months for disaster to strike. It also required less fertilizer, less labor, and less attention. In a world where every spare hand was needed in the fields, barley's hardiness was invaluable. Farmers planted it not because it was glamorous but because it was trustworthy. When famine hit, barley was often the difference between life and death. During the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, relentless rain rotted crops and flooded villages. Wheat harvests failed quickly, leaving nobles scrambling for imports and peasants staring at empty stores. But barley, though damaged, still gave enough to stretch into bread, porridge, and ale. Families could cling to barley when they had nothing else. In those years, barley loaves may have been coarse and bitter, but they were the thin line that kept starvation at bay. Barley's role was not just physical. It shaped the culture, too. In monasteries, monks relied on barley bread and ale to sustain their long hours of prayer and labor. In villages, barley brought communities together through communal brewing and market exchange. At fairs, sacks of barley were traded like currency. It was a thread woven into every ritual, every gathering, every act of daily survival. Barley wasn't glamorous, but it was everywhere. It was the grain that filled not just granaries, but the rhythm of medieval life. The contrast with wheat reveals how unequal medieval society was. Nobles and wealthy merchants could demand wheat as tax or rent. Records show that peasants often had to give up their precious wheat harvests to lords and monasteries. Barley remained theirs because it was seen as lesser, unworthy of noble tables. Yet that lesser grain was what fed the people who did the work, tilled the fields, built the churches, and fought in armies. The bread of the commoner may have been black and heavy, but it powered the hands that kept England alive. Wheat was prestige, barley was strength. Picture a peasant family at the end of a long day. Their dinner is a thick barley pottage, simmering with a few vegetables, maybe a scrap of salted fish if they are lucky. Alongside it sits a jug of weak ale, brewed from the same grain. The father breaks a dark loaf, passing pieces to his children. The crust is hard, the taste earthy, but the warmth in their stomachs is enough. They may never taste the soft, refined wheat bread of the nobility, but barley ensures they can rise again tomorrow and work the fields. It may be plain, but it keeps them alive. Over time, barley's image would shift. As farming methods improved, wheat became more common and desirable. But in the heart of medieval England, barley was the true staple. It was the grain that endured harsh seasons, the grain that brewed the safest drink, the grain that stayed in the hands of the poor, while wheat was taken by the powerful. It defined daily life far more than wheat ever did. Without barley, medieval England would have been crippled by hunger, rebellion, and collapse. It was never celebrated in royal feasts, but it was the quiet hero of survival. Today, when we think of bread, we think of wheat as the universal grain. We see white loaves, pasta, and pastries everywhere. Barley feels forgotten, reduced mostly to animal feed or craft beer. And yet, there is a strange irony in our modern age. Barley is making a return as a health food, praised for its fiber and nutrition. What was once dismissed as poor man's grain is now sold as wholesome and premium. History has a way of turning the tables. What nobles disdained is what we now rediscover. But in the Middle Ages, barley was not a luxury, not a trend, not a choice. It was necessity. It was the difference between an empty table and a meal, between sickness from dirty water and nourishment from ale, between a family surviving winter or being lost to it. Wheat may have represented aspiration, but barley represented endurance. Its story is not written in castles or palaces, but in the muddy lanes of villages, in the black loaves eaten by peasants, and in the countless mugs of all that kept communities alive. Barley's legacy is quiet, but powerful. It reminds us that history is not only made by kings or nobles. It is made by the humble, by the common, by those who endured. Behind every cathedral and castle, there were barley fields feeding the hands that built them. Without barley, medieval England's story would have been one of collapse, not survival. Wheat was the dream. Barley was the reality. And sometimes, reality is stronger than any dream.